The Baltimore Ravens and New York Jets face off in a Week 12 showdown. We break down the biggest stories, key matchups, and so much more coming up on this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets. Welcome in to the show. I'm Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens. Joining me is John Butchko of Locked On Jets, and we are here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. Thanks so much for being here with us. Whether you're an everydayer, a first-time listener, or if you're somewhere in the middle, thank you so much for all your support here on Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets, and just on the Locked On Podcast Network in general. We have a jam-packed episode, the Ravens and Jets facing off in week number 12. We're going to dive into the biggest stories for each teams, as well as matchups to watch, and keys to victory, how each team can pull out a win in this one. Today's crossover Thursday of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets is brought to you and presented by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. John, I'm excited for this game. I know that Ravens fans, though, are a little nervous for this one, knowing that Tyrod Taylor is going to be the starter instead of Justin Fields. I assume that's the biggest storyline in New York right now. Is that it, or is there something else that's a little bigger?
Oh, well, I mean, you don't want to talk about the emergence of Jawan Briggs after Quinnen Williams. That's the Quinnen Williams trade. No, of course. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely, Kevin. And I'm excited for this show because, Kevin and I speak frequently, but that's with Kevin's work on Locked On NFL. Sometimes I go on and talk about the Jets. So I'm excited to be able to ask you some questions for once about the Baltimore Ravens. But yeah, the Jets have made a quarterback change this week. It will be Tyrod Taylor, the former Raven, starting this game. And before we started recording, we joked that I think the last time these teams played, it was 2022 week 1, where Joe Flacco was the Jets starting quarterback. So Jets always seem to throw a former Raven out there when they face Baltimore. Kevin, the way I've put it on Locked On Jets this week is I don't think the Jets had a choice but to make a change at the quarterback position. And I've been one through the course of the season who said that, the Jets needed to stick with Justin Fields, that, Tyrod's near the end of his career. Well, he's had a long career and I think a very successful career, that he's not part of the Jets' future. And Fields was a guy who at least had some theoretical upside, but we're past the point of that. And even with this Jets season essentially over at 2-8, and they traded 2 of their 3 best players at the deadline, I just think you reach a point where the starting quarterback plays poorly enough that you just have to make a change. Because even if these games aren't important for Jets fans, and even if I don't think the games are that important, these games are important for the guys in the locker room. These games are important, especially for a young Jets team that's trying to build a culture, for a new Jets coaching staff trying to establish itself. It's going to be tough to win games with this roster going forward. I don't know how much Tyrod Taylor improves the Jets' odds of winning, but the way Justin Fields was playing, it was a week-to-week basis. He was giving the offense no chance to succeed. So I think they had to make the change.
And this is essentially, you're right, a trial run for some of these guys, figuring out with this new coaching staff who are their guys. I know a big topic of conversation, certainly I'm sure with the Jets itself, but with the old NFL landscape has been Breece Hall, and if they're going to try to retain him this offseason, and is he an Aaron Glenn guy or not? Is he a Jets guy or not? And, he's been splitting work with a couple of other guys, a very talented player. You bring in A.D. Mitchell in that Sauce Gardner trade, you can kind of work him in the offense and see if he's someone. Even John Metchie getting involved. I mean, there's some high pedigree players, at least coming out of college, that you looked at coming out of those draft classes. You're like, all right, the potential is there. And now you get a look at those guys to figure out, all right, who do we want around? Who are our guys? The Ravens certainly have their guys, particularly on the offensive line. And John, I think that's the biggest story for the Ravens this week. And honestly, it has been for a while now. The defense has certainly turned it around, and we'll get to that. But on the offensive line, it's been a struggle. And Thanksgiving's coming up, and I've said this, I'm very thankful the Ravens will never have to see Myles Garrett again this year in that Cleveland defense. And with Quinnen Williams now in Dallas, they don't have to face him either. Now, that doesn't mean the Jets don't have some quality pass rushers on that unit. They didn't trade Jermaine Johnson away. You have others as well that have stepped up, but I think that Baltimore, it doesn't really matter who they've played this season. The Ravens O-line has struggled. They didn't really have a contingency plan at the guard spots this year. Daniel Falele and Andrew Voorhees both have struggled mightily. Roger Rosengarten has regressed in his second season at the right tackle spot. And you can kind of see that with the way the guard spots have been very inconsistent for them this season. You even see guys like Tyler Linderbaum, I think, being a product of that because, there's not, for example, like a Marshall Yanda next to him or a Kevin Zeitler who was good for a couple of years in Baltimore. It's inexperience, and I think Linderbaum has to make up for that. Ronnie Stanley's been up and down. We've seen flashes of great Ronnie this year. We've also seen flashes of poor Ronnie this year. But Baltimore, the key for them is to be able to protect Lamar Jackson and to run with Derrick Henry. And usually the Ravens' success story has been, all right, we're just going to line up heavy on heavy. We're going to out-physical you. We're going to bully you off the ball, blow you off the line. And that just hasn't been the case this year. Baltimore, and the stats back it up, Baltimore's been a much better third and long team this year than they have been at third and short. I feel more confident in them picking up 14 yards than I do them picking up 4 yards with the way that offense has gone this season. So obviously the other story is the Ravens are on a 4-game win streak. They're back to 500 after starting 1-5. Lamar's back. They've turned it around, especially defensively like I talked about. But man, I'll tell you what, the Ravens offensive line has been a key contention point this season. And, when you look at this Jets team right now and some of those defenders that they have, I mean, Will McDonald stepping up in a big way this season with his 7 sacks. That's someone you're going to have to stop. It's going to be interesting to see how that Ravens O-line holds up.
I'm really interested in that take because I think looking from afar, you saw the Ravens start 1-5 and now they are where they are, where I think they're a game out of the AFC North lead.
Yeah.
I mean, about a month ago, I think a lot of people thought Pittsburgh was going to win that division in a walkover because it seemed like, this just wasn't Baltimore's year, not Cincinnati's year, Cleveland's Cleveland. So it's actually really, I'm really interested that with your take because like from afar, it seems like the Ravens straightened everything out, but it still sounds like there are some pretty fundamental issues.
Yeah, it's a lot better. I mean, look, I'd be lying to you if I came on here and said, "Oh, the Ravens are winning games, but they don't look any better." No, I mean they've looked a lot better, especially defensively, and that's been the other thing where Baltimore was the worst scoring defense in the league. They were bottom 5 in rush defense, pass defense. They couldn't force turnovers. They didn't. The Ravens sack leader is Nnamdi Madubuike, who hasn't played since week 2. With 2 sacks. So, it's been a struggle defensively. They haven't been able to generate a lot of pressure with 4, but coming out of the bye week, that's been the biggest turnaround and where I am most encouraged, where the Ravens offense had to kind of carry that defense for a lot of the early part of the year, and look where it got them. They got to 1-5, but now the defense has, because again, Lamar didn't have a great game last week. People are wondering about his situation with his knee injury. He's coming off a hamstring. People are wondering how healthy Lamar is. Still good enough to play in the games. Obviously, no one's 100% at this point in the season, but the O-line, you got to be able to protect your guy. And when guys are coming at you 1 second in the backfield, and you can be Lamar Jackson, you can be whoever you want to be. You can't work with that every single play, but I'm very encouraged defensively with what we've seen. The blitz packages, the Ravens getting very aggressive there with Kyle Hamilton. They have started to win more one-on-ones. So I'm very intrigued there on that front. But with Garrett Wilson not being in the lineup for the Jets, John, I mean, there are a lot of opportunities like we talked about for younger receivers, even younger tight end. I mean, Mason Taylor getting an opportunity here to show himself here. What does this passing offense for the Jets look like with Tyrod Taylor compared to Justin Fields with the skill sets? And obviously with the Ravens having guys like Nate Wiggins out there, Hamilton himself, Chidobe Awuzie's played really well for them this season. Marlon Humphrey, it's to be determined if he'll be back yet. We'll know more as the week goes on with him. What does that passing offense look like considering there's no Garrett Wilson and that's going to be life for the Jets for at least the next couple of weeks?
I think the biggest difference is that Tyrod Taylor is not going to be afraid to throw the football down the field. And one of the big surprises this year with Fields is how reluctant he's been to throw the deep ball, because if you go back to his days in Chicago, he was always one of the most aggressive deep ball throwers in the league, but he was very hesitant. He was very hesitant in a lot of ways. I mean, the ultimate example of that was the game in London the Jets lost, where Fields had 9 sacks. I think it was something like 5 seconds to sack. I mean, a lot of the sacks he was taking in that game were just the result of him holding on the ball too long. And it was part of a bigger picture where he just was too hesitant to let the ball go when he had a window. and he was, he just was not throwing the ball down the field. So, we'll talk. I'll have more to say about the Jets receivers ahead here on our crossover show. But the one thing I will say is that I do think that the Jets will at least be willing to throw the deep ball more with Tyrod in there. Now, a couple weeks ago, Tyrod came in at halftime of a game the Jets lost to Carolina, threw a couple of interceptions on some errant deep balls. But I think that there's at least more of a threat of a big play in the passing game with Tyrod in there.
Yeah, and I think that that's something the Ravens, they don't like to give up those deep shots and those deep passes. So we'll see. They like to do that bend, don't break. So we'll talk a lot more about the defense and the offense for both teams with some matchups to watch on both sides of the ball. Be sure to stay tuned. Plenty coming your way here on this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets. First, the show is brought to you by Prize Picks, and this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement of this sports season, whether you're following the NFL, NBA, or both. There's no better time to jump in on the action. If you haven't tried it yet, Prize Picks is the simplest way to play. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats. And if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play anywhere Prize Picks operates, including California, Texas, and Georgia. I've been using Prize Picks during both football Sundays and NBA tip-offs. It keeps every game exciting. And I like picking my favorite players like a Lamar Jackson, or maybe you like Tyrod Taylor. You got Nikola Jokic in the NBA to see how my predictions play out. The new Stacks feature is a game changer. You can now pick more on Steph Curry's 3-pointers, points, and assists in the same lineup. Plus, if one of your players leaves early with an injury, the injury reboot saves my lineup from a loss. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. Moving along here on this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets. Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens and John Butchko of Locked On Jets still rocking out with you here. Appreciate everybody for being here, making Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets your first listen of the day and a part of your day in general. We talked about the biggest stories for each team, John, in the first part of the show. Let's dive into some matchups to watch. Is there any specific position matchup, any specific player matchup that you're looking forward to in this game?
Yeah, so going back to what we were discussing near the end of the first segment, I have Jets wide receivers versus Ravens corners. And it's not really clear what the hierarchy is for the Jets at the wide receiver position right now because there are new names here. Garrett Wilson will not play in this game. Kevin, I think you alluded to this a little bit earlier. One thing that I said is when Garrett Wilson got injured is you never want Garrett Wilson to be out. It's a bad thing for the Jets. But if it has to happen, this is a situation where there's at least something to be gained because the Jets at the trade deadline added 2 relatively young receivers with upside, 2 guys who have not proven themselves in the NFL, but with good draft pedigrees. Adonai Mitchell, who came over in the Sauce Gardner trade, and John Metchie, who came over when the Jets traded Michael Carter II to Philadelphia. The difference between this Jets receiver group and the Jets receiver group of a few weeks ago is there's upside. Early in the season, beyond Garrett Wilson, the Jets were rolling out guys like Josh Reynolds and Tyler Johnson and Alan Lazard. And, those guys, maybe not Lazard, but those guys, belong in the league, but they're backups. They're guys who should not be seeing significant playing time, particularly on a rebuilding team where you're trying to work in young guys. The Jets did not have upside at the wide receiver position. Now they do. Now, Adonai Mitchell's Jets debut came last week at Thursday night loss to the Patriots. It was a rough game. There were 3 big plays that could have been made on targets to him. 2 of the plays were not made because the ball went through his hands. Now, there was one where Justin Fields misfired and he was open running down the field. But you want to see more from Mitchell. Metchie had a good game. He had a touchdown. He had 3 catches. And the touchdown came on when the defender slipped. But there's an opportunity for these guys to carve out a role on this team in the future. I don't think going into 2026, the Jets starting receiving trio is going to be Garrett Wilson, Adonai Mitchell, John Metchie. I don't think that's realistic. I'm not sure you'd want to trust either of these guys to be your number 2 receiver next year. But one of these two guys, if they step up, they could begin 2026 in the starting lineup as the number 3 receiver. So interesting matchup, and they're going to have an opportunity not just this week, but in the final 6 games after this to prove that they belong as part of the solution here, the Jets receiver position.
Yeah, and that's the trial run we've been talking about, which I think is exactly what the Jets need to be doing here. Still, obviously, trying to win games, although I'm sure, John, there's a bit of the fan base in New York that does want the Jets to get the best draft pick that they can. But even still, we know the players aren't going to give up on the field. They're fighting for opportunities, fighting for jobs, like you talked about. So it's funny that you had the Jets receivers versus Ravens corners, and I think again with guys like Nate Wiggins, Chidobe Awuzie, Marlon Humphrey, etc., like the Ravens probably win just with Wilson being out there, but that doesn't mean that's on paper, right? On the field, obviously, you got to play the game. And if those guys can step up and do their job, then could make life a little harder for Baltimore. But I have the Jets corners versus the Ravens receivers, mainly because, John, Brandon Stephens, an old friend over here in Baltimore, now plays over there in New York. And Brandon Stephens, very controversial figure in Baltimore, particularly last season, as he struggled mightily. He ended up causing Baltimore to move on from him. The Jets gave him that 3-year, $36 million deal. Zay Flowers has been the target share dominator in Baltimore this year, and I feel like Brandon Stephens and Zay could potentially get a matchup here on each other, depending on whether Stephens follows or not, or where Zay lines up on the field. But how has Brandon Stephens played for the Jets this season? And how do you feel about that Ravens receiver group going up against the Jets corners? Because I know that there are some other players in that room that are probably looking to prove themselves as well.
Brandon Stephens has been a surprise, and that's been in a good way. When the Jets signed him, I had no idea why they gave him that contract because I saw him play in Baltimore, and he was not good. He was horrible the first couple weeks of the season. I mean, you go back to listen to some of the Locked On Jets episodes from early 2025. I was complaining, why did the Jets sign this guy? His play really stabilized after week 3, week 4. He's been playing really good football. Now, he had a rough game the last time the Jets took the field Thursday night against the Patriots, but he's been good. He's been a solid starter. I've been surprised. That said, I think this is a tough matchup for him. I think Zay Flowers is not the type of receiver that Brandon Stephens matches up well against. I worry about any receiver going up against Stephens with speed. So I think that's a matchup that I would expect to favor Baltimore.
Yeah, and we don't know yet. Again, we'll learn more during the week on if Rashad Bateman will be available for this game with his ankle injury. But you have other guys, DeAndre Hopkins feels like, John, he's always been good for like a clutch catch or two. He got a snap uptick in the last game that Bateman missed in week 11 against Cleveland. Tez Walker, who's a young player, season uptick. Even a guy like Tylan Wallace, he's season uptick there. But we also see a lot in Baltimore with the tight ends, and they got the running backs involved in the pass game too. But now with no Sauce Gardner there, Brandon Stephens does take on that much larger role in that Jets defense. And other than that, it's like Jarvis Brownlee and other guys like that who have to step up.
Yeah, Brownlee was acquired from Tennessee in an early season trade. He played well his first couple of games with the Jets, but the last 2 games have been really rough on him. Penalties, being out of position. I mean, there was even one play against the Patriots where he got beat for a first down and then didn't touch the guy down, and they allowed the guy to get up and run for about 10 more yards. So, and the other corner spots a bit up in the air. Zariah Thomas was the 3rd round pick. He stepped into the starting lineup after the Sauce Gardner trade, but missed last week with a concussion. If he can't go, I would expect second-year guy Quantez Stiggers to be in the lineup. And Kevin Stiggers is a special teamer. I mean, he's a guy who really hasn't shown a lot at the corner position. I mean, even in the exhibition season when he was playing in the second half against practice squad level players, he was struggling at corner. So that's a guy I would expect the Ravens to go after if AZ Thomas misses this game.
Yeah, that's interesting. And again, 2 teams that are a little banged up in that area. And, with the Jets, I guess it extends to they just traded away their talent. So you don't have that guy there anymore. But I also am intrigued by how this Ravens special teams unit can bounce back against this Jets special teams unit. John, last week, the Ravens special teams unit, not the kicking's been fine. Tyler Loop, who's replacing Justin Tucker this season as a rookie, he's been great. Jordan Stout, their punter, is having a Pro Bowl season, in my opinion. The long snapper, Nick Moore, his snaps have been great. but we saw LeJontay Wester fumble a punt or muff a punt that essentially gave Cleveland the ball deep in Ravens territory in this game against the Browns. We also saw Jake Hummel on a 4th and 4 go off sides on a punt that gave the Browns a first down. It's those types of mistakes, and they need to be able to bounce back because special teams, I mean, that's who their coach is, a former special teams guy who's been in Baltimore for a long time now. That's been one of Baltimore's identities, that special teams matchup, because the Ravens almost lost that game in Cleveland because they had those special teams gaffes. That's an area where if the Ravens can clean up their sloppiness, the kicking game can continue to go. And it's same thing for the Jets too. I mean, if they can have a great special teams game and beat Baltimore's unit in that regard, it gives the offense opportunities or, pins the Ravens offense deep in their territory for the Jets defense to try to get a stop. I mean, that's a huge part of the game I'm looking at.
Yeah, and the Jets have had a lot of struggles this year, but their special teams have been phenomenal. Nick Folk has been automatic as the kicker. Austin McNamara, the new punter, has done a great job. Rough game against New England, but really been excellent through the course of the season. And in the return game, I mean, the Jets 2 weeks ago against Cleveland had a kickoff return for a touchdown by Kene Nwangwu and a punt return for a touchdown by Isaiah Williams. So this has been an excellent special teams unit. The Jets may be losing games, but it's not because of their special teams.
Yeah, it's huge matchups all the way around. Coming up in the final part of the show, we're going to be diving into how each team can win this game and put another W on their record and how they can do it. So stay tuned. We got plenty coming your way here on this Crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel has so many great things over there. The NBA, it's back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. Keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And in the NBA, personally, I'm a big Denver Nuggets guy, and right now, they're doing pretty well over on FanDuel. The odds for them to win the championship are plus 650. The only team with better odds than that is the Oklahoma City Thunder at plus 175. So I like that number for Denver. I think they're going to do a good job this season. They already are off to a great start. So over on FanDuel, it's the place that you need to get to. Right now, FanDuel's giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Continuing on Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets, Kevin Ostreicher and John Butchko still talking with you on this Crossover Thursday. I want to remind everyone today's Crossover Thursday is brought to you and presented by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. All right, John, let's get into some keys to victory for both teams. I'll start with the Jets. What are some keys for you that the Jets have to take care of if they want to win this game?
The first one for me is the Jets need to use Breece Hall in the passing game more. It's been about a month and a half since Hall had more than 3 targets in a game. 2 weeks ago against the Browns, they only targeted him once, and he took that for a 42-yard touchdown on a screen. It's been one of the baffling developments of this Jets season. Kevin, I'll tell you, 2 years ago, Nathaniel Hackett was the Jets offensive coordinator, and Hackett was a very unpopular guy. By most accounts, he did a very poor job as Jets offensive coordinator. Near the end of that season, he made a comment that he didn't realize what a great receiver Breece Hall was before he started coaching him. And that was used to really bash Hackett throughout the fan base. And in context, I don't think it was completely fair, because it was really more of just Hackett complimenting Breece Hall. Oh, wow, this guy's even better than I thought. That year, the Jets targeted Hall as much as any team targeted their running back in the league. This year, the Jets aren't targeting Hall in the passing game. And he's a talented player, but you also look at the quarterback play the Jets have had. You look at the receivers the Jets have been running out there. There's not a lot of talent in this passing game, so it makes no sense not to utilize his skills as a receiver. Against New England, he only played on 5 third downs, 2 of which were on the first drive, which I think we were on the script. The other 3 were in the fourth quarter when it was desperation time. You're trying to come back. You keep your best players on the field. So that says to me that the Jets are taking him off the field on passing downs. And it just doesn't make sense why you take your best player off the field on the money downs. Even if he's a running back, he's still a weapon as a receiver. So I think the Jets need to utilize Breece Hall more in the passing game.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And, the Ravens have also kind of taken some flack for keeping some of their best players off of the field in key third or fourth down moments. Derrick Henry in particular, they've gotten better at that this season. It was more of a last year thing, but it's popped up here and there. I think for the Ravens, something I'm looking at for them is they've just not been good in the red zone this year. They're the 26th best, or 28th, excuse me, even worse, 28th best red zone offense in the NFL. 47.2% in the red zone this year. They went 1 for 4 against Cleveland in week 11. Again, it's just like that field shortens up. Feels like they just aren't able to get the job done there when they need it. And, it's really important in these games that you score touchdowns instead of kick field goals, where that's how this Ravens offense operates. Like, you shouldn't be struggling in the red zone or even like the 10 or 5 yard line of the opposing team when you have Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, but that's been kind of the story for them. So that'd be a big key for me. Another one for Baltimore is just stay out of your own way. I mean, again, we saw multiple mistakes in the game in week 11 against Cleveland. We talked about the special teams ones, but Lamar Jackson throws 2 interceptions, both of which were not his fault. One went off in the hands of Keaton Mitchell for a pick 6 into Devin Bush's arms. The other one, Roger Rosengarten, got pushed back into the backfield so quickly and so badly that Lamar's throw bounced off of his helmet up in the air into the waiting arms of Carson Schlesinger. So, I think that the Ravens, they have an opportunity to win this game and win it comfortably, but they have to stay out of their own way with their mistakes. I think a final one would just be to play their game, particularly defensively, and just force Tyrod Taylor's clock to speed up. Now, the difference between Taylor and the last 2 quarterbacks, or 3, I guess, they've faced with Dylan Gabriel, Shadur Sanders, and J.J. McCarthy, is Tyrod Taylor's been around. Tyrod Taylor is a veteran. That hasn't been the case with the past 2 matchups for Baltimore. So being able for them to maybe give him looks that are unfamiliar or uncomfortable, get pressure on him and force him to make a couple bad throws, force turnovers, win that turnover battle. I think that's really important for the Ravens too.
Yeah, and I would actually say something similar for the Jets, key to victory. Jets need to play disciplined football. I think anybody looking at this game would conclude that Baltimore is the more talented team, and that means that when you're the less talented team, you can't make things easy for your opponent. In New England last week, the Jets made things easy. They played undisciplined football, and that's been one of the stories for the Jets on defense this year, whether you talk about missed tackles, whether you talk about penalties, whether you talk about breakdowns in basic coverages. These have been issues all season long for the Jets. And one thing that has been on my mind all week is I don't think I've ever seen a defensive lineman play zone reads in a less disciplined way than Michael Clemens. And I just envision 2 or 3 times in this game, Lamar Jackson, and Derrick Henry back there. And Lamar is going to fake a handoff to Henry, and Clemens will bite and run himself onto I-95, and Lamar will pull it and break off a big gain. Jets just need to play disciplined football. And that's something that's been lacking. And when you're a relatively untalented team by NFL standards, look, everybody who plays in the NFL is talented, but you compare the Jets roster with most other teams, it's near the bottom of the league. You can't just give things away the way the Jets have. And if the Jets want any chance of keeping this game competitive, they have to play smarter, more sounder football.
And that would be music to a lot of Ravens fans' ears when you're talking about Lamar Jackson running. He hasn't really run as much this season. John Harbaugh said there's really nothing to it, but, there have been moments where you would think, oh, hey, Lamar's going to rush a little bit in this game, and it just hasn't really happened as much throughout the course of the year. So maybe this is the game where that all gets broken out and the Ravens have success doing it. But for now, 2 teams in different situations right now, still looking to put up a W on the board. But that's all we have for you here on this crossover Thursday of Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks to everybody who's an everydayer and for all of the support. And of course, we're going to have all the content and coverage you need leading up to this game for Friday's episodes, as well as over the course of the weekend. So for John of Locked On Jets, I'm Kevin of Locked On Ravens. Be sure you check out all the content we have coming for you on Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets. And we'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens and Locked On Jets.